With a history stretching back all the way into the 1970s, is it really any surprise that we've lost a few D&D video games over the years? Although most D&D video games have been quite well preserved either through fan efforts or through platforms like Good Old Games and Steam, there are a few titles that are almost certainly gone forever, and I doubt we'll be seeing them again. You'll notice the common thread between all of these is an online server component, which makes them much harder to salvage. In fact, we've managed to lose not just one D&D MMO, we've lost two. These are D&D's lost titles. Let's begin with what is probably the most famous example on this list. It's also definitely the least lost out of anything we'll be talking about. You can still play it, albeit in a very different form than you originally could. I'm including it here because I think it's an interesting story, and on top of that, I also know that a lot of you guys will be asking me about this title if it's not on the list. So let's talk about Neverwinter Nights. No, not the BioWare games. Neverwinter Nights is oft cited as the first graphical MMORPG, and many would even go farther and call it the first MMO as we know it today. And while the community has managed to recreate an offline single-player version, we will never get the chance to play it as an MMO again. Except maybe we will. We'll get back to that. Neverwinter Nights was released in 1991. It was published by SSI and developed by a dev company called Beyond Software, who would later rename themselves Stormfront Studios, which is definitely a choice. Do not Google that. Anyway, the game was based off of the old SSI Goldbox engine, and was created in partnership with AOL. It goes down as having one of the more brain-melting business models, where you paid per hour of gameplay. Most of the core user base ended up paying hundreds of dollars a month in order to play Neverwinter Nights, and seemingly didn't complain too much about that actually. The community was very strong, with guilds running constant social events to keep the game alive. Neverwinter Nights was popular enough that AOL kept it alive all the way from 1991 until 1997. Though AOL made the ballsy choice to mess with a winning formula and to play around with the pricing a little bit more than they ought to have. They lowered the pricing, by the way, by a lot. They stopped doing the per hour thing. And although this did reportedly succeed in bringing the peak user base to over 100,000 in 97, it actually made the game, way less profitable, a lot less lucrative. There were more players, sure, but they were each paying less individually, and also making the servers more expensive to run as they did so. Ironically, by making this iconic and well-liked game so easily accessible, all they really did was assemble 100,000 people to get really mad when the game closed. This was reportedly one of the great early internet shitstorms. I mean, in the modern day, this kind of stuff happens 3 times a week, but it was pretty unique in 1997. Work began in the community pretty much immediately to try and create a clone of this game, with a project called Forgotten World starting in 1998 and releasing in 2003. The game was intended to be just different enough from the original to not get sued, so it wasn't a truly perfect recreation. Forgotten Worlds unfortunately went down in 2015, and so too did anyone's chances of playing Neverwinter Nights as an MMO. Except there's some news. Oh yeah, I'm ticking off the bell. You've lost your bell privileges. You're just gonna have to be without a bell while I'm recording. I'm sorry. A few weeks ago, I stumbled across a small YouTuber named Fandrax who, do you mind? Who put together a really phenomenal, retrospective on Neverwinter Nights. And he hopped into Forgotten World anyway, just to see if it was still working, and, he was able to access it. It worked. He didn't see anyone online, so it may not actually be an online game anymore. It may only be the single-player version that's still up. It's difficult to know. Regardless, if you do want to play the closest thing you're going to get to the original Neverwinter Nights, then Forgotten World is probably your best bet. Also, go check out Fandrax's video. He's going into a lot more depth in that than I'm going to go here. Either way, Forgotten World seems to be the best thing available right now if you wanted to try Neverwinter Nights as an MMO, albeit it's not a pure recreation of the original. There are, however, several offline versions of Neverwinter Nights that are more or less pure recreations. But yeah, there you go. That's the only game on this list where it's not super lost. The others, good luck playing them again. But first, before we go any farther, let me make it clear that this video was brought to you by the patrons. Hey, the channel's been growing marvelously, and I really appreciate all you guys. But I am kind of at the point now where some of the equipment is starting to get a little outdated, and I'm going to need some upgrades soon. And if you would like to help out, then Patreon is really the best way you can do so. It's just investing in better videos. Here's what you're gonna get. Exclusive previews of all of my videos. An exclusive podcast for patrons where I discuss behind-the-scenes details on all my videos, and the rules and printable game assets for that 800-year-old Norman role-playing game that I covered in a video like a lifetime ago. I made it nice and easy for you to play. You just have to sign up on Patreon. Plus, top-tier patrons will also receive early access to my videos. Now, here's 3 games we lost to corporate dumb fuckery. Gone. Reduced to ashes. The year was 2008, and Facebook games were becoming quite popular. Tiny Adventures, and I'm going to pause for a little bit because I assume a few of you are currently screaming into your monitor just remembering this random casual game you played 15 years ago. You're calm now? Anyway, so it was released on Facebook in 2008, and it was quite well liked. I remember playing it actually, although I remember literally nothing about it. And I doubt I'm the only one here who's suddenly got the nostalgia brain because this thing had a surprisingly robust user base. With an advertising budget of, get this, $0, they quickly reached a user base of 350,000 players, and became one of the top engaged user bases on Facebook at the time. This according to Paul Sotosanti, the lead designer, on his blog about the game. Details are a little bit hard to find on how it worked, but here's what I've pieced together based off of Paul's blog, as well as a few things I've found just around the web. The game had you make a character, choosing race, class, and in the later period of the game's existence, gender. You'd manage your items and inventory, then pick out different adventures to send your character on. The game would make you wait for a bit of real-world time. I mean, remember, this was a casual game, so they assumed you'd be playing a few minutes here and there across the day. And then you would get a postcard from your adventurer outlining everything that happened and how the combat went. There were 40 different adventures you could go on over the course of your character's career, and you had no hopes of seeing all of them in a single playthrough, nor seeing all the combinations of things that could happen in every adventure. Rather than let the game go on forever, like a lot of casual games do, this one had a defined story ending, and once you reached it, your character would retire and you'd be sent back to the character creation screen. However, you'd get some New Game Plus kind of stuff to help. In this way, the fun of the game was to see if you could find everything, and also to achieve the high score. This being released in the age that would bring us Farmville a year later, you can obviously expect that there were social mechanics in this game. However, they weren't as egregious as social games would eventually come. We hadn't yet reached the year when Facebook was nothing but a gigantic ad to play Mafia Wars. Mostly this game's social mechanics involved you going through your friends list and selecting each of them in turn and giving them buffs, and they would do the same for you. And you would need to have a lot of your friends playing this game if you wanted to maintain buffs on yourself with a 100% up rate. No, Daisy, stop it! Oh my god, the cat is attempting to eat my microphone cord, and she's going to electrocute herself. Okay, this is the safest place for her. She is not going to eat the cord and die. Healing was pretty slow in this game as well, but it could be accelerated because your friends could all heal you. So if you wanted to play this thing frequently, you'd need a lot of friends playing with you so that you wouldn't be down from damage all the time. And to my surprise, based off of the surviving reviews, Tiny Adventures was pretty well received actually. People liked it. The devs were clearly proud of what they'd made, and the player base was pretty happy with the game they got. This seemed to be exactly what people wanted out of a D&D adventure browser game. The main sticking point in the early days was that there was a lack of ability to choose your character's gender. However, that was patched out later, and after that there didn't seem to be very many complaints about this game at all. So, with the developers enjoying what they made, the community eating it up, and all of it packaged in an astonishingly easy to update and maintain game, I mean, what could go wrong? This sounds like a fantastic game. Except that was kind of the problem. It was a video game, and it was made by Wizards of the Coast themselves. Problem with that is that they currently had a contract with Atari saying that Atari had the exclusive rights to make Dungeons & Dragons video games. Not a great situation.
In a really stunning display of how the fuck did this happen, no one at Wizards of the Coast had ever stopped to think about whether or not they were violating their license agreement with Atari by making this game. WotC's solution was to immediately shut the game down with basically only a few hours warning to the player base and no explanation as to why. And then they never talked about it again. Though the game did have a nice year and a half it was alive, so that's good, I guess. So this whole thing with the rights, I mean, it's an absolute disaster, of course, but there were a few positive sides. Everyone now knew that there was appetite amongst the community for casual D&D video games, browser-based stuff. Plus, they just stumbled across a winning formula on how to make these games. The only thing that would be needed was for Atari to essentially make an unofficial sequel, keep the mechanics, and everything would have been great. Except Atari basically threw the old formula away and just created something entirely new. What are you doing? And I'll tell you about that game, but there's a weird little story that happens between these games. You see, between Tiny Adventures and the second attempt at making a Facebook game, there was a bit of a falling out, because Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast's dad, ended up nullifying the treaty with Atari. This, by the way, was because Hasbro found out that Atari had signed a sub-licensing contract with Bandai Namco, who were going to make D&D games now, except Hasbro didn't like Bandai... Where did I put Bandai Namco? They didn't like Bandai Namco. They were competitors, you see, and that meant that the contract would therefore have to be nullified. If you watched my last video, you understand that I am internally screaming because I was just saying, man, it sure would be nice if another Japanese company finally got the chance to use the D&D rights like last time, because the one time it happened, it went so well, actually. But when it comes to the D&D gaming license, there are no happy endings. There has never been a happy ending. Listen, somewhere in a forgotten corner of Bandai Namco headquarters, there is a brief for a FromSoft D&D game, and it will just eternally remain in a filing cabinet, and I hate that. Heroes of Neverwinter was the follow-up to Tiny Adventures that was desperate to pretend that Tiny Adventures never happened. Now, the first game played mostly like a game book with time-gating mechanics. However, the second game just didn't do anything like that, and it was more of a strategy, adventure, isometric thing. From me sitting here in the modern day, it certainly looks like kind of one of the worst sorts of, cash grab casual games. However, the format was still pretty new in 2011, so it may not have triggered the same kind of ick factor that it does in the modern day. Or maybe it's just better than it looks from my desk 12 years later. Who knows? Point is, Heroes of Neverwinter was relatively well received and quite well liked. You cleared out dungeons on an isometric tactical map using modified 4th edition rules. Not a lot to say about it, honestly, other than that the social mechanic was quite unique. You could only bring one of your own characters into dungeons with you. All the others in your party had to be hired each time from among the characters that other players had made, with it apparently being free if they were on your friends list. Adding to the social aspect, apparently there was a dungeon creator so you could make and play community maps. With a draining bar that was refueled only by waiting, or by sharing the game around, or by paying actual real-world money, this game was clearly not just an advertisement for 4th edition in the way the Tiny Adventures was. They were clearly going for the game itself to be profitable this time. But with a smaller player base than Tiny, Heroes of Neverwinter would in time be placed with what was to be a more profitable game. Much like Tiny Adventures, Heroes of Neverwinter was hurriedly removed from Facebook in 2012, much to the anger of the player base. In this case, though, the Facebook page actually still exists, so you can see all the angry comments, and all the spam.
Now this is something that I do consider to be good advice. I took my first paycheck and I put it in the goddamn bank. Then I took my second paycheck and I put it in the goddamn bank. I had seen the roller coaster of my father's career, top in the world and unemployed, and I never wanted to take a job because I needed money.
God, Facebook was hell, wasn't it? And the devs did know it. Games were moving from the browser and into the cell phone, and D&D wanted in. That's why the next title in this trio of games was called D&D Warbands. And it was intended for release primarily on mobile devices, however the intention was still to backport it to Facebook later, which never happened. A version was released in 2012 on the iOS store and subsequently removed a few months later. Why? I don't know. I don't know. There's not a lot of information left on this game. This is probably the most lost game on this list. It existed for several months, wasn't that popular, and basically the only living source that I've been able to find was a couple of reviews, and there's a wiki that's still open for it that tells us kind of some of the story details. Anyway, we know this is kind of a strategy game, and I don't know much else about it. I couldn't even find footage of this game, so sound off in the comments if you know anything about it. I'm quite interested to know. Now, for the game that inspired me to make this video in the first place. A game that most of you have probably not heard of, however, a game that has affected most of you. Dark Sun Online. Crimson Sands, the Dark Sun MMORPG. For those not in the know, Dark Sun is a now defunct D&D setting that is sort of D&D's take on Conan the Barbarian style fantasy. The world is scorched by a magical apocalypse, and now ruled over by cruel warlords and their tyrannical city-states. It's one of the grittiest and darkest settings ever produced for Dungeons & Dragons, and designers in the modern day have expressed a lot of trepidation about the idea of adapting it into modern D&D. However, if any of this sounds interesting to you, then fret not, because I'm going to be covering the single-player games over my next 2 reviews. So subscribe to the channel if you'd like to know more about those games. And, like the video, because if this video does well, it will give me a nice high self-esteem while I'm working on those videos, and, everybody likes that, huh? Like the video for self-esteem. Self-esteem, let's go! Now, those 2 games are very important to this story, because after seeing how well Neverwinter Nights was doing for AOL, AT&T approached SSI and said, hey, can you do that for us too? Just as Neverwinter Nights was an MMO version of the Gold Box engine, Dark Sun Online was an MMO version of the 2 Dark Sun games. And a lot of stuff ended up getting reused because this game had no budget. Despite this game being a specific request from AT&T, SSI didn't throw very much funding its way. And then to make matters worse, AT&T withdrew from the project because they ended up taking down the service that was supposed to have Dark Sun on it. All seemed lost, except an unexpected savior came to the rescue. But that savior is also the reason why this game is so incredibly lost. The web service 10 ended up picking up the project, and Dark Sun Online ended up becoming one of their flagship games. Now, you may be wondering, who the fuck is 10? Exactly. That's the problem. Who the fuck is 10? Because having a good game or 2, having Dark Sun and some other stuff on there, wasn't enough to make a platform. And when they went down in 1999, so did Dark Sun, never to be resurrected. 10, however, did get resurrected as Pogo.com, but the same treatment was not given to Dark Sun. The game apparently had the problem of being completely riddled with hackers right from day one. The problem seems to be the fact that all the game logic was being run on your computer rather than on the server, so that just made it like child's play to hack the game. Numerous patches were done in an effort to find a solution to this problem, and what they ultimately decided was to split the game up into 2 different modes. You had your Plane of Law and your Plane of Chaos, and you may know that today as a PvP server and a PvE server. And this was considered to be a good enough solution because all the hackers ended up transitioning over to the PvP server, and everyone who didn't want to deal with the hackers hung out on the PvE server. Reportedly, games like Ultima Online and EverQuest learned quite a lot from Dark Sun Online. Not merely the good things, but also they learned a lot about what not to do. Crimson Sands therefore has the dubious distinction of being the game that went ahead of everyone else and stepped on all the landmines so that no one else had to. Which, I mean, that's a legacy. Preservation on this game is sadly pretty much impossible from a community perspective, and it's so painfully frustrating because the files are right there. You can find it on most abandonware sites easy. Unfortunately though, the word is that nobody's managed to get it working at all, not even a single player version. The key problem, as I understand it, is this. The game is hard-coded to require access to the 10 servers to work, and those servers have been down for 25 years. A community effort was put together to try and find a way to make the game work despite that. However, it seems like they've given up for good. And what's worse is there's not really any good way to consume this game. You can't even watch a video of it, really. After all, Dark Sun Online went down in 1999, which was just on the cusp of when software like Fraps would come out and make it far easier for home computers to screen record. We just don't have a lot left of this game, and I doubt we're ever going to see it again. It, and all the other titles on this list, are D&D's lost media. With so many D&D video games having come out over the years, it's easy to forget about the games that we lost along the way. So on top of thanking my patrons today, I'd really like to thank all of the websites that do just incredible work at keeping these old games alive, especially when the publishers have abandoned them. So much of the work I do on this channel relies on the heavy lifting that these websites have done. So thank you so much for keeping games alive. You guys don't get enough credit. I guess I've got some Dark Sun videos to make now, don't I? Well, I guess I'll see you then. And if you haven't already, it would really mean the world to me if you'd look into supporting the channel on Patreon. It helps me so unbelievably much. Thank you. Appreciate all you guys. See you next time.